There has been so much talk lately about the pagan roots and traditions concerning Christmas and Easter. Some are even saying that Christianity today is mostly based on pagan practices, and Jesus Christ is more closely resembling a pagan god rather than the biblical Messiah spoken of in Scripture. Let's look at some of the facts and try to more closely understand these ideas and conflicts that are growing today in popularity. In the year 312, General Constantine won the battle Milvian Bridge that made him ruler over the Roman Empire. He attributed his victory in the battle to the God of Christianity because of a vision. He stated that in gratitude he would make Christianity the official religion of his empire. The problem was that over half of his new empire were not Christians, but pagans that practiced pagan forms of worship that included human sacrifices and rituals. These rituals included the worship of Nimrod, who became the sun god Baal, his wife Semiramis, and their child Tammuz. These gods were known by many names throughout the vast Roman Empire. Constantine, fearing a political landmine and an eventual civil war between the religious groups, encouraged religious leaders to go out of their way to win over this pagan population in order to make them Christians. Constantine's first order of business, if he was to avoid a civil war inside of his empire, was to change the Christian day of worship from the Saturday Sabbath to Sunday in order to coincide with the pagan sun god day of worship. He enacted this decree under penalty of imprisonment or death in 321 AD. This was a powerful first step in unifying the pagan population with the Christian population. The big game changer was when Constantine changed the pagan winter solstice festival on December 21st through December 25th that celebrated the birth of Tammuz and the return of the sun to the earth, which would eventually lead to the spring equinox. Under this popular Easter festival during the spring equinox, the pagans of the empire celebrated the return of the fertility goddess Semiramis to earth in a large egg beside the river Euphrates. Upon her exit of the egg, she displays her power as the bare-breasted fertility goddess, now with the new name of Ishtar, Astarte, or Astaroth, and turns the first bird she sees into an egg-laying rabbit, or at least that's how the legend goes. Pagans commemorating the Ishtar event back in the days of Jesus would celebrate an open public sexual intercourse between pagan priests and virgin women upon an altar. After the public display of numerous interludes, the 3-month-old babies that came from the result of the sex acts in the previous year would be brought out to the altar and slaughtered as a sacrifice in the name of the goddess Ishtar. The blood of the babies would then be used to paint bird or chicken eggs red and then offered up at the altar to the goddess. These are the facts that are undisputed concerning the festivals of Christmas and Easter. It is also a fact that we cannot find any occurrence in the New Testament of any of the disciples or the Apostle Paul celebrating Easter or the birth of Jesus. It was not a custom back in those days to even celebrate birthdays, and most Bible scholars today will agree that Jesus was not likely born in December, as shepherds would not have been abiding with their flocks by night, as stated in the Gospel accounts, in the middle of the winter. It would have been way too cold for the flocks to be on open ground, and there would not have been any vegetation for them to eat anyway during that time of the year. So what's the big deal? The issue is that in the New Testament we see a number of examples of the disciples and Paul keeping the feasts that are spelled out in Leviticus 23. These are the feasts that God calls His people to keep forever, it says, throughout all generations. And you guessed right, these feasts have nothing to do with Easter or Christmas. And these were the exact feasts that Constantine outlawed in order to politically align his empire and avoid a large religious civil war. So the question comes down to, what would God say about keeping pagan festival dates with pagan traditions that have been renamed with a biblical theme? Well, the Bible has a verse specific to Christmas in the book of Jeremiah that warns us not to do what the heathen does. Thus saith the Lord, and learn not the way of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the heathen are dismayed at them. For the customs of the people are vain. For one cutteth a tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workman with the axe. They deck it with silver and with gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers that it move not. Constantine did the exact opposite of what was written in Jeremiah and other parts of the Bible, and adopted a pagan religious, man-made tradition and doctrine and used it to worship the true creator of heaven and earth. And today, 1700 years later, after Constantine, we have millions of believing Christians who erect in their homes a pagan fertility symbol that was used thousands of years ago to worship the god Baal. It was a Roman emperor by the name of Constantine that outlawed the true festivals of God that Paul and the disciples celebrated, and in their place instituted pagan festivals in order to retain control of his kingdom and avoid a large religious civil war. Why do we not see any examples of Easter or Christmas celebrations in the New Testament with Paul and the disciples? We see numerous examples of Paul and the disciples keeping the feast of the Lord as detailed in the Torah in Leviticus chapter 23. Acts 2, verse 1, we see the disciples gathered for the feast of Shavuot, or what we today call Pentecost. Acts 18, verse 21, in the King James Version, we see Paul saying that he must by all means keep this coming feast in Jerusalem. In Acts 20, verse 6, we see it mention again the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which was Passover. In Acts 20, verse 16, we see again Paul attempting to be in Jerusalem for the Feast of Shavuot, or what is today called Pentecost. In 1 Corinthians 5, verse 7 and 8, it mentions Christ as our Passover and not our Easter, saying, "Let us keep the feast." 2 Corinthians 15, verse 20 and 23, both mention Jesus as our first fruits. The Feast of First Fruits would have been the day he was resurrected, the first day after the weekly Sabbath, as written in Leviticus 23. These verses and others show without a shadow of a doubt that these feasts that God said were to be kept forever for all generations were still important to Paul and the disciples. It wouldn't be till 300 years later, at the time of Constantine, that these feasts would be outlawed and the Sabbath day changed by decree from Saturday to Sunday. You may ask, why am I just now hearing about this? Well, that is a good question. In the last chapter of the prophetic book of Daniel, it says in the last days people will travel and knowledge will increase. We live during a time when traveling around the globe has never been easier. You can leave New York City and be in the most remote parts of the other side of the planet in less than 24 hours. This fact, along with the combined ability to share information across any language during this information age of internet connectivity, would in fact allow knowledge to increase. The reason you are hearing this information for the first time is because we are nearing the time when the Almighty Creator of this universe will begin to call His people once again out of Egypt. Those who are His sheep will respond to the shepherd's voice. Those who are not will harden their hearts and continue to go the way of the heathen. Our Father has given us, His children, 7 festivals during the year that we are to keep forever, it says, throughout all generations. We should be like the first century believers, the Bereans, and get back to searching the Scriptures to see which is true and which is false. What Scriptures do you think that it's referring to? 1 Corinthians, Romans, the Gospels? Those Scriptures were not written yet. No, the Scriptures that it's referring to is the Torah. For more information, visit our website at new2torah.com.